So I'm about to start setting up a project now, and there are some basic project settings which I need to set up at the start. Multi-work means there are multiple people working on the project at the same time, and peer reviewers are randomly selected amongst the group. Single work means there's one person writing on a project by themselves, writing a work on their own, and I'm going to find the peer reviewers for them. Automatic means that at each step in the project, which it goes from draft phase to feedback phase to revision phase to publication phase, I've preset all the dates, and it's going to advance automatically. When someone takes an action, the next action follows. Manual means I, as the publisher, I'm going to get a notification to say, okay, have a look at this, check this, are you happy with this? And if I am, I manually advance the project to the next phase. How do I deal with time? Well, one is I can set all the deadlines in advance. But the other thing I can do is I can set it as a series of durations. So, okay, 5 days after you, or 3 days, or 2 days, or whatever it is, after you get your peer review, your reviews back, you need to submit your work. So these are relative dates, if you like. What I can also do is I can start the project with the settings from an existing project. And in fact, that means that I can share projects, I can save projects, I can, once I've constructed a project design, I'm able to stay with that project design and use that and recycle it and edit it as time goes on. In fact, what I'm going to do is, in order for this project to be set up, I'm going to search for a case study design that I have created, and that means that as I do this demonstration for you of how you build this active knowledge producing community, that you'll be able to see it all filled out rather than me having to type it in and you having to put up with my slow typing. So now I'm going to go and I'm going to set this up. So now we're back in the creator space, and I want to speak about this, this notion of recursive feedback. That's the idea that I want to be speaking about in this particular video. So see over here, this is the feedback area, and already in an earlier video we discussed the types of feedback that are offered in Scholar. Reviews, so here we have the review criteria, the review results, and the place where you review, where you actually give something a score and where you write an explanation. We have an annotations area, where if I go onto view mode, I can actually make annotations in a work which are detailed in-text comments. So let's say I want to say, rather he contends that educators, I want to talk about that, I create annotation and I go add either a comment or a suggestion and I can actually code the change suggestion. Right, so, and I can add that. I can make a publication recommendation and I can run the checker. These are all forms of feedback that occur in this particular environment. Now, if I want to see the history of all that feedback, see here if I go view in browser and I want to see open version reviews, all recent versions, I can see the whole history of the feedback around this work. So here we've got, so it was a practice analysis of a new learning ecology. That was the project that the student was working on in this case. Can technology save the lecture? This was version 1 of his work, and see it's got videos in it. It's got all sorts of media, very nicely laid out information. And this was the review of the first, the feedback of the first person, including the annotations that they put in, which are all marked through the text. This is the feedback of the second person, including the annotations they put in, and so on. And then this is version 2, which was produced as a result of the revisions that were given to that feedback, and you can see that it's a more extended, more thoughtful piece of work as a consequence of all those revisions that have been put through. So, and then there's another version that followed that. So what you can see here is we have a kind of a logic here about recursive feedback. So this is the work that the person is doing, and this then is the feedback area where you get feedback about the work. And of course, you can always pull this slider backwards and forwards if you want to think more about the feedback or more about the work, and you can actually slide it entirely out of the way if you want to. So these two sides of the process, the work and the feedback around the work, means that we have an environment here of work and recursive feedback around that work. So in other words, it's dialogue. By recursive, we mean not just feedback, but feedback on feedback, feedback loops. So that's one aspect of the recursive feedback that happens in Scholar. The second aspect is in the dashboard area, where a number of metrics are performed. So I've now moved into dashboard, and these are some metrics about my own activity. This is what I've done on my personal community page. These are my creator projects. These are my publisher projects. But when I go into my publishers, let me go into now a relatively recent piece of work. These are my students that are working in my HRE 572 and 457 class. And you can see here, this was the project they were doing. This was the project name, this was its description, and there were 45 members in this group. So when I do this now, what we're doing is we are analysing 45 pieces of work times 2 or 3 or 4 versions in some cases, and all the feedback given, every version, every change, and in fact, look, it's probably a couple of 100,000 words that are being analysed, and we warn that this process might take 20, 30 seconds or so. It doesn't happen quickly, but what you get is a lot of immediate data and immediate feedback as the teacher or as the coordinator of the knowledge community, if we want to frame it that way. We get an awful lot of feedback around all the work that the students have been doing. Now, this kind of recursive feedback, I would call this recursive feedback instructor feedback, feedback around instructional design, around the progress of individual students, and so on.